honestly, you cannot read The Late Great Planet Earth and not get the very strong impression that Hal Lindsey was saying, in a couple of years, this is all going to be over. So, and it wasn't.
Hey everyone. Today we welcome a special guest, Gutenberg tutor Ron Julian. Ron earned his BA degree in linguistics from the University of Oregon and his MA in religion from Reformed Theological Seminary. He is the author of Righteous Sinners, now available as an ebook, and co-author of The Language of God, a common sense approach to understanding and applying the Bible. He also teaches at Reformation Fellowship, a humble and faithful church located in Eugene, Oregon. The following excerpt comes from a sermon Ron gave in 2007, taking the church through Paul's first epistle to the Thessalonians. Most, if not all, of the church's teachings can be found as audio files on the Gutenberg College website. I will leave a link to them in the description box below. Ron?
Okay, so let's come back then now to what Paul is saying in the text here. I want to take us into chapter 5, verse 1, where he says, "Now as to the times and seasons, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you." This is the question that always fascinates us. Okay, now we're getting down to it. We're talking about the times and the seasons. Paul's going to tell us, how's this going to happen? When is this going to happen? How am I going to know when it's going to happen? Who's the Antichrist? What does 666 mean? When I first started into this stuff, when I first became a Christian, we were all fascinated. I don't hear people doing this stuff so much anymore. Maybe I'm just not listening to the right people. But when I started at this stuff, everybody was, let's count up the letters in Henry Kissinger's name, and add them up and see what we can do and see if he's the Antichrist. Or, everybody had, honestly, you cannot read The Late Great Planet Earth and not get the very strong impression that Hal Lindsey was saying, in a couple of years, this is all going to be over. So, and it wasn't. And so, we kind of have to go back to plan B, figure out what exactly is going on with this stuff. So the question about the times and seasons, this is the thing that we get to arguing about is, how do I know what's going to happen? What are the signs? How can I tell? Does the fact that Israel is back together, does that mean it's about to happen? If I see troops massing on this border over here, is that what it's talking about in Revelation? And should I, what should I do? That's the stuff that we really get off on. So maybe Paul is going to answer that question now. Now as to the times and seasons, brethren, let me straighten you out. Here's how it's going to work. Well, he says that they have no need of anything to be written to them. That doesn't sound real promising, because it sounds like he's not going to tell them. And that's kind of right. He's not. Why would he say that they don't need to be told anything? Is it that he's already told them all the details? You guys already know. I told you about 666, and you know who the Antichrist is, and you know what year it's going to happen, and the whole deal. So you don't need anything told to you about the times and epochs, the times and seasons, because I've told you all of that stuff already. Well, no, I don't think so. We already know. They didn't know enough to know that when Jesus came back, the dead were raised first, and then those who were living went with them. That was a pretty fundamental thing, and he had to clarify that to them. And when we get to 2 Thessalonians, there's a bunch of other stuff that they're not real clear about as well. So it's not as if they have this great picture of this is exactly how it's going to work. I think there is a different reason, a more important reason why Paul says that they don't need to have anything written to them about this. And I think that's very important. It's actually going to help get us to get perspective on this issue. How should we think about the second coming and about knowing the times and seasons and so on? Okay. In verse 2 he says, "For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night." First of all, the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is a basic biblical concept. It shows up in the Old Testament, it shows up in the New Testament. And the idea is this, as I understand it. Actually, this may seem sort of crass, but I think we can see what kind of idea is associated with this if you think of that old expression, every dog has his day. That to have your day is, okay, things are going along and it doesn't seem as if, things are clicking for you, but there's going to come this day when it's going to be your day. And when your day comes, then look out. Well, I think that's what we're talking about here. Basically, life seems to go on the same year after year. Unrighteousness keeps winning. Bad things keep happening. And it seems like God is kind of losing. You look at the world and things are bad and they keep being bad, and there have been wars and there's still wars, and now we're better at killing each other than we used to be. And, that's the world that we live in. What's God doing? When is God going to do something? Well, there is this day coming. It's the day of the Lord. Right now, it's our day. We seem to be on top. But there's coming this day when the Lord is going to step in, and it's going to be His day. On that day, God steps in and says, now it's my turn. It's a day of salvation, but it's also a day of judgment, depending on who you are. This day, and Paul is clearly connecting it with the return of Christ, it's coming like a thief in the night. This metaphor is taken straight from Jesus in the Olivet Discourse, and I think it's a very important metaphor, helps us to see what's going on. Jesus said, "But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason you be ready too, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think He will." Okay, so here's this analogy. What's the whole thing about being a thief is you're not going to do well as a thief if you announce in advance when you're coming. If you send a note and saying, next week about 2 a.m, I'll be there robbing your house. Make sure to stay out of the way while I'm doing things. That's not the way it works. The way a thief works is he works on that presumption that we all have, that we fall into, is that everything is always going to go along the way it always has. When I go to bed and I look around and I see all my stuff, when I wake up in the morning, it will all still be there. Because it was there the day before, and it was there the day before that, and it was there the day before that. So my expectation is it's always going to be there. Things are always going to go along the way I thought. But with a thief, he's taking advantage of the fact that you have that expectation, and he comes at a time when you're not expecting. There are 2 ways of dealing with this problem. The fact that there are thieves and they can break in. One of them is to just take that stance of ignorant oblivion. Hey, every day I get up and my stuff is still there, and that's the way it will always be. I don't believe in thieves. They're out there, but my life is going to go on uninterrupted. Nothing's going to happen to me. Or, with a thief, you can be prepared and vigilant. I don't know when the thief is going to come. But that means that I have to be prepared all the time. I have to assume that the thief could be there at any time. And so I will try to be vigilant, alert, and prepared, so that if the thief comes, I'll be prepared for him. Well, I think that's what Paul is going to expand on now. The 2 possible ways that we can deal with the day of the Lord are like these 2 approaches that you can take to a thief coming. The first way is the way that the unbelieving world is going to deal with this day of the Lord that is coming like a thief in the night. And that's what he says in verse 3. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like birth pangs upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. The world is like the homeowner who goes to bed thinking, every night when I go to bed, I have all this stuff, and when I wake up in the morning, it's still there. And that's what's going to happen tonight as well. They're saying peace and safety. Things are okay. We've got it together. We have made things okay for ourselves, and this is going to continue on. Things are good, and they're going to continue to be good. We're in control of our lives. We're making it happen. And then the day of the Lord comes breaking in unexpectedly. This is not what I was looking for. I was expecting to reap the rewards of my care for my life in this world. God steps in to judge, and destruction comes upon them as suddenly as birth pangs come to a pregnant woman. The idea being that you're going along and you weren't expecting it, and all of a sudden the pain hits. That's the way the day of the Lord is going to come in like a thief in the night. They were oblivious. They were not taking God seriously. They never thought that one day they were going to have to deal with Him, but now the day has come. This is part of why the Thessalonians don't need to have any more of this explained to them. They knew enough to know that God has not announced His timetable in advance. He's going to step into history when people are not expecting it. So, concerning the times and seasons, they know that God has not told us the times and seasons. We don't know when this is going to happen, just like we don't know when the thief would come. But I think there's an even more important reason why they don't need to have anything explained to them, and that arises from what Paul goes on to say. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. What I understand to be going on here is Paul is taking Jesus' metaphor and expanding on it, this idea of the thief in the night. The world is overtaken by the day of the Lord, coming like a thief in the night, because that's their situation. It's like it's nighttime. They're in the dark. They don't understand. They don't see what's going on. The nighttime is the time when the light is gone. So what do you do when the light is gone? You fall asleep, or maybe you get drunk. The light is gone. It's not the time to do anything. So instead of being alert and being sober, you go to sleep, or you distract yourself with the dissipation of getting drunk. So, instead of being alert, instead of being awake and aware, there is something coming and I need to deal with it. They're asleep. Instead of being sober and recognizing there are serious issues here that I have to deal with, they have distracted themselves the way someone who's getting drunk is distracting themselves with alcohol. Instead of being sober, they are dissipating themselves. They are distracting themselves from the things that they need to be dealing with. But as believers, we are not in the dark. We know something. We have the light. We know that God is there. We know that He is offering salvation through Christ. We know that we have this great hope in front of us. What we know is a hugely important question, because Paul is not saying here, you know when Jesus is coming back. You know what the signs are that will tell you when He's going to be there. It's not that he's saying to us, I'll tell you what it's going to look like in advance so that then you can get ready when you see that stuff. What he's saying is, you're ready because you're always ready. It doesn't matter when it happens, because the believers are in the light, they're alert, they are sober, they are prepared for His return. But what's the nature of that preparation? Do they know who the Antichrist is? No. The nature of that preparation is that they have put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. We are awake. We are sober. We know what's at stake. We are dealing with the central issue of our lives. God is real. God has promised us life. God has given us a great hope. God has called us to love one another, and that's what life is all about. That's what our lives are about. He has promised us life. We believe that promise. We love each other because of that promise, and we have a great hope because of that promise that one day we will enter into salvation, a complete salvation that awaits us, saved, rescued from the whole problem of life, sin, death, the whole deal. So, this is the picture, I think. The day of the Lord comes like a thief in the night on the world because the world is not ready. The world doesn't expect that anyone is going to be there. But it's not coming like a thief in the night for God's people because we have heard His promises and we believe them. We don't know when it's going to happen, but we know that it's going to happen. And we are living in the light of those truths. So we're ready. We are of the day. We are in the light. We know. We're awake. We're sober. For God has not destined us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we are awake or asleep, we may live together with Him. Therefore, encourage one another and build up one another, just as also you are doing. So, we know that there is a great day of wrath coming upon the unbelieving world, but we will escape that wrath because we are pursuing faith, hope, and love. Paul brings it back to the original subject, this problem of what happens to the people who died. He says, whether we are awake or asleep, which is to say, this is not the same awake or asleep he was just talking about, I think. You have to be awake in one sense. You can't be drunk and not alert. But now he's saying whether awake or asleep, which is his euphemistic way of saying whether alive or dead, we will be with Christ. Jesus died for us so that we might live with Him. His death, our life. And that applies to the ones who died as well as to the ones who are still alive when He returns. And Paul says that this is meant to be important to us. We are supposed to encourage each other with what he has said here. This message is supposed to give us courage and comfort and hope in the midst of what we're facing. And remember, they were facing difficulties of many sorts, including the fact that some people had died. Okay, so it seems to me that the return of Christ is meant to be the great focus of our lives. And in this passage, we can see two reasons why that might be the case. First of all, the return of Christ is the hope that gives meaning to our lives today. I mean, there are all sorts of analogies that we could think about where my understanding of what's going to happen in the future is what determines how I think about my situation now. And I talk about these things all the time, but why do I go hiking through the wilderness toward some goal? Why did Israel, at least in theory, go into the wilderness following God to the promised land? Because there was a goal, because there was some place to go. And there are many things that we do now, that we invest ourselves in now, because we think that they're going someplace. We think that they're taking us someplace we want to go. So, Paul's message to them is, this is the thing that should encourage us. In this world, we struggle with sin and futility and death and decay. But Jesus is coming to call us together to Himself. When He calls us, we will be transformed. On the day that Jesus comes again is the day when life begins for real for us. We will know God, we will know Jesus, We will know each other as we should. We will be what we have longed to be as human beings. This is our great hope. That's why, like the Thessalonians, we are waiting for his Son from heaven. And that's why Paul encourages them by this picture. Whether you're dead or whether you're alive, all of us together will join him. And that's when life will start. The second reason why this needs to be a focus for us is because of this idea of the day of the Lord. The fact is that life is not going to go on the way it seems to be going on now. You and I all know what our problems are. Each of us could sit down and do a whole day's talk on, here are my problems. Here are the things that are going on. Here's my problem here. Here's this person I know's problem. This is my problem with this other person I know. And those things are significant. They are the arena in which God is calling us to live out our faith, to love each other, to remember what's true. But the fact is that it's not going to last. That there is going to come a time when this stuff is gone and we're going to have to deal directly with our Creator. The day of the Lord is coming. That means that we have to deal with this now. The thief is coming and will break in. If I live as if there is no thief, and every day will be like the day before, I will get up and all my stuff will be there, then I'm a fool, because the thief is coming. And while he hasn't told us when, he has told us that he is coming. God has announced it to us. I'm on my way. There is a day coming when all of this is going to be wrapped up. And we have to decide, am I going to be oblivious or am I going to be ready? We have a commonsensical sort of expression that we relate to all sorts of things in life. We talk about someone who is shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. The idea that someone who is really focused on this particular little thing that is going on and yet has lost sight of the fact that there is this iceberg coming and there are more important things to deal with than where are the chairs on the deck, because this ship is going down. And where the chairs were is not going to matter. Well, we apply that to all kinds of situations. In a business situation, this person, they're just, here we are bleeding money over here, and this person is worried about, where are people sitting around the table or something like that, shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. Well, basically what Paul is saying is that the world around us is shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. It has lost sight of the fact that there is an iceberg coming and this ship is going down. And what am I going to do about that? I know that it's popular to kind of disdain the Christian message of pie in the sky, or the idea that there is a judgment coming and you had better deal with it. But that's the biblical message. There is a great hope for God's people. There is a great judgment coming on the world. And both of those things are realities, or else they're not. Maybe Paul just made this stuff up. Maybe there was no Jesus. Maybe none of this is true. But I think it's true. And if it is, then it's something that we have to come to terms with. What's helpful to me about this passage, though, is that it helps us to understand what it means to come to terms with that. And this is what has been helpful to me, because when I first became a Christian, and I've told this story many times, but the first book I read was The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. And this was all new to me. I didn't know. When I became a Christian, honestly, I know this seems strange, but when I became a Christian, it was all about me admitting reluctantly that God was there and that he had a right to tell me what life was about. That was really what I did. I didn't know. I had forgotten that Christians believed in life after death. I wasn't even thinking about that issue. The issue was, is there a God, and does he have the right to come along and tell me what life is all about? So when I read The Late Great Planet Earth, I thought, wow, this is cool. Jesus is coming back and we're going to live with him forever. And I thought this was great. And I started, the first teaching on the Bible I ever did? It was probably like within a month of me becoming a Christian in this high school Bible study that somebody was doing. They said, "Oh, you've read The Late Great Planet Earth. Why don't you come teach us on biblical prophecy?" And I did. I went in and I taught them about biblical prophecy because I had read Hal Lindsey. So, and I would like to say that I was a little bit embarrassed by it. I actually said, I don't really know much about this, but they wanted to have me do it, so I did. But what I came to see after a while, I threw myself into that stuff, and I was joking about the colored charts and everything, but I was making those colored charts. I was like making a new Bible, snipping verses out of Ezekiel and Daniel and the Olivet Discourse and that stuff, and putting them all together and saying, okay, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. If you can put them all together this way, then you can come up with this great. And I was going to have it all figured out. There's something, especially some sorts of minds, and at that spot in my life, I had one of those kind of minds, and maybe I still do, I don't know, but there's just this attraction to, it's a puzzle. I'm going to figure out this puzzle. God put a puzzle in the Bible, but he wouldn't have put that puzzle there if it wasn't meant to be solved, and I'm going to be the one to solve it. So, it was crazy. But one of the most important things that happened to me early on was coming to recognize that there was something fundamentally wrong about that approach to this question. I was really abusing the Bible. I wasn't paying any attention to the context or where these things came from. But I had really lost sight of what was important. Why are we even talking about this stuff? And it wasn't until I finally came to realize that the important thing was for me to decide, what am I hoping in? What am I looking for in life? And that if I had committed myself to the right thing, that it ultimately didn't matter whether I knew when exactly it was going to happen or how it was going to happen or who the Antichrist was or any of that kind of stuff. And I think that was a very important kind of place to come to. Well, what Paul tells us here is helpful to get that perspective. Because what Paul's saying is, you are of the light. You are not in the dark. His coming is not going to overtake you like a thief in the night. But he's talking to people who barely have just a brief and bare understanding of Christian theology and certainly don't understand the intricacies of biblical prophecy. But why is it that they're in the light? Why is it that it's not going to overtake them like a thief? Because they are busy investing themselves in believing the gospel and hoping in the promise of the gospel and loving each other in the light of the promise of the gospel. And it is those people who believe and invest themselves in the gospel that will be prepared when Jesus comes. So, what's important in this passage, I think, is what being prepared doesn't mean having the 16-color chart. Being prepared means being a person of faith who believes that God will keep his promises. And then people who have all sorts of different perspectives on when and how it was going to happen. I've said this before, but I kind of picture like, there'll be this one day, somewhere along the line, Jesus will gather us all together after we've been in the kingdom of God for a while and say, okay, this is going to be fun. We're gonna have a show of hands and see how many people got it right. How many people actually knew how this was going to go down when it happened? Kind of like, bingo or something. Somebody go, yes, I got it right. And it'll be this really weird guy that nobody ever listened to. Everybody thought he was a real crackpot. So that would be fine. But the idea is that all of those people will be with him there who didn't have it right, because having it right wasn't the focus. That wasn't what it was about. So on the one hand, this is everything. We have to be prepared. We have to live as if this world is not going to last, and my eternal destiny depends on what Jesus does with me when he comes back. And yet on the other hand, we have to approach this topic loosely, recognizing that it's a difficult one to sort out, and that we can understand how people might come to different perspectives, and that the point isn't to be the one who gets to raise his hand and say, I had it right, when we have that meeting down the line. But did I invest my life in the right stuff? And that seems to me to be the most important thing that we can learn from this stuff, is that what matters is that I see Jesus coming as the point of history and the point of my life. And if I see it that way, then I'm ready.